Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another tutorial by Eclectify. Today we're gonna have a look at how we're gonna use the Flutter package Firebase Auth for authentication. First things first, before you watch this tutorial, make sure that you followed my previous tutorial on how to set up Firebase Core, because this is required always before we use another Firebase package. This always has to be installed first. But now let's have a look at how we can install and use Firebase Auth. First things first, of course, in this case, just copy it to your clipboard, then paste it into your pubspec.yaml file, and then in your terminal, execute this command. And if you followed the tutorial with the Firebase Core, you already know that whenever you add a new Firebase package, you have to rerun this command in your terminal. So all you have to do is press enter. It will query all your Firebase projects, and then you can select the projects on which you want to use Firebase Auth, and then it's going to enable Firebase Auth for your Firebase project. So I'm not going to run this because I've already run this. I'm actually taking the same project we did for Firebase Core and just expanding upon it. Because of this, I'm also using the same Firebase project, which I called Firebase Core Tutorial, as you've seen in my previous tutorial with Firebase Core. Now to enable authentication, you press on this drop-down button here, authentication, and usually it will show you a screen like this, where you simply have to press on get started, and then you can select what kind of sign-in method you want to use. It will show you options like these here, and I simply use the email and password option because that's what I'm going to show you in this tutorial. However, you could use like a phone number or Google sign-in, whatever you want. I will show you how to use these different sign-in methods when we come to it in the code. Now, as you can see on our Firebase console, it's very simple here. We have the tab users. This is where we are going to see all the users who have created an account with our app. And we have the option when we use this email and password sign-in method that we can send out an email so that the user verifies his email address. I'm going to show you how to do this in the code, but when this email gets sent out, you have to go to the templates here and look over how this email is going to look like. So when I send out this email, have a look at this. So it says verify your email for project and then the project number. So as you can see here, if you scroll further down, verify your email for, and as you can see, this is the subject line and this app name. So you could basically just edit this and put in a hard-coded string in here instead of reusing this project dash really long number and so on with the message, the display name, and so on. So I would recommend you do this. One thing to mention is that when I sent out this email, it went into my spam folder. So that's why it's a good idea to change this project number to something custom. All right, now let's have a look at our code here. So I took the previous app as explained previously and I expanded it very simply by a listview.builder. And here I just defined a list of strings with different titles because I'm going to show you the Firebase functionality for authentication, storage in another tutorial, Firestore and cloud functions also in another tutorial separately. So for this authentication, then I created a screen. I call it the auth screen, which we're going to use for the authentication. And this is very simple. So we have the listview.builder, we have item counts, so how many titles we have, and then the item builder here. This inkwell is just simply to be used so that we have an on-tap functionality, which is gonna open up the screen where it was pressed at which index. For example, our app will look something like this. And since our first title is authentication, it will have this screen here. And the content of each clickable item is then simply the title. So for example, authentication here. And so when we press on this, this is going to open up the auth screen. So I'm going to press on this here and let me show you side by side how this looks. So this is a very simple screen. We have an app bar, a back button, and then we have the text up here, the status. Then we have two text fields with some size box in between and three elevated buttons here, sign up, sign in, and sign out. And when, for example, the sign up button is pressed, I call a function within the authentication class .signup. So I created a custom class called authentication, which I'm going to show you in just a bit. And the same thing is repeated for the sign in in and a sign out. And since this is a stateful widget, I also have an init state function. And within this init state function, we want to know when the user is logged in and logged out so that we can show the status here. So in this case, when we use this Firebase auth.instance.auth state changes.listen, whenever the user gets logged in or logged out, this listen function will trigger. And so if the user is null, then the user was signed out. If the user is, however, not null, then the user is signed in. Of course, you can do a lot more custom code here, but this is just to show you what you should use when you want to listen to when a user state changes. All right, now let's have a look at the authentication class. So for using the sign-in method with email and password, we simply use this function called create user with email and password, and here we just give through the email and password. One thing to note is when I give this through here, so sign up, and I give this as email because this email controller is our text field controller. Here we get the text from it. And why do I say trim at the end? Because a string could look like this, ABC, or it could look like this, ABC, and then some spaces here, which we don't want to have in the email. That's why this trim function will just reduce these spaces on the right, and also if you have some on the left, it will also reduce it to just this. Now let's have a look at the authentication class. But before we do, I quickly want to mention something else on how to do different authentication types. For this, you can simply go to the pub.dev package description here, and if you click on this link here, see the documentation, you will get to this overview, and here you can have a look at how you can implement the different kind of authentication types. So I'm going to show you how to use authentication with email and password. For this you can simply go on here, and as we will soon see, we're going to use the function called create user with email and password. If you wanted to do, for example, Google sign in or Apple sign in, then you can go to this social auth, and here it's going to be explained how to use the Google sign in. For this you actually need to install another Flutter plugin, or for Facebook you also need to install the Flutter Facebook auth plugin, or for Apple you would have to install two packages here, sign in with Apple and crypto. And if you want to do these kinds of authentication, the steps here are pretty straightforward. However, to keep it simple, I'm just gonna use the email and password for this tutorial. So what we want to do first is sign up with an email and a password. I'm gonna give it a password and then click sign up. Now if you go to our authentication tab within our Firebase project under users, you will be able to see our new user created. If you don't see it, just simply press on here to reload the list, and then you will see, okay, it's an email account created, signed in, and it's user UID, so it's the unique ID. And here you could simply reset the password, so the person will get then a new email with a link to reset his or her password, disable the account, or you can also delete the account. Now, how did I do this? As I mentioned earlier, I used the Firebase function create user with email and password. One thing to note is I kept this very simple. However, if you want to make sure that everything is correct before you even get to this step, you should first check whether the email is valid and the password is to your standards. So you could simply do like password.length is smaller than 6, then you could return, and then you could check whether the password contains special symbols and has at least one uppercase letter and one lowercase letter. Then you could also check whether the email is valid as mentioned. So what do I mean by that? Usually you have the format of name@mail.com, and you want to make sure that it will have this and then a dot also. For this you can simply use a regex expression, which I'm going to put down below in the description box. But anyways, once you've checked all this, and also of course make sure that the email and password are both not empty, then we await for Firebase to create our user with the email and password. And then usually you would get a user here. You can get it with firebase auth.instant.current-user, and if this is not null, then the user was successfully created. So that's why I print out the user here, and as you can see here, it printed out the user, and it will give you all kinds of different variables you can later on use for your own purposes. For example, as mentioned, the unique ID is also here. Then an optional step is also to send out a verification email. You can do this by, of course, first checking whether the user is not null. So this should be not null, and then the user object has a variable called email verified, and if this is not true, so this should not be true when we create the user, then we simply say await user dot send email verification. This will send out an email looking something like this, as I mentioned earlier. So if everything went right, then we are done with the sign up. If an error occurred, for example a Firebase auth exception, there could be different instances. For example, the error code has a weak password. You would have to adapt your own specifications for the password, so to make sure that it's a strong password. Then also it's possible that the email already is in use, so it already exists. So for that you simply show the user a message that he or she should use a different email, or in general if another error occurs, we just simply print this out here. So that's it for the sign up function. Let's quickly have a look at the sign out. This is very simple. Await firebase auth.instant.signout. For this I simply press on sign out, and now let's have a quick look at the sign in function. So regarding the sign-in function, this might be a bit complex. You can keep this shorter if you don't require the email verification. So you would simply do this, the sign in with email and password. You just simply give through the email and password, and then the user should be logged in. Otherwise, a Firebase auth exception will occur again. For example, the user was not found, so the email does not exist, or the wrong password was used, or again, a different error might occur. But if you need email verification before the user can actually log in, then you would first go with accessing the current user, because when you use the sign up function here, create user with email and password, it will sign in the user. So it will store persistently that a user exists. That's why this user should not return null if you've used this create user with email and password. If the user is null, then you simply sign him or her in with email and password, and then you always have to make sure to reload the user, because otherwise you don't know whether the email verification occurred. So then you have to reassign the user with the current user, and here again you have to check whether the email is verified or not. And in this case I use a return value of future bool. So if the user hasn't verified his email, then I return false, and then you can react, for example, by showing the user that he first has to verify his email. Otherwise the email has been verified and it returns true. Now one last thing, we can have simply a look at this function here, is email verified. You could simply replace this within the sign-in function here. Instead of writing all this, you could simply just call the function here is email verified, and it will either return false if the user is not either signed in, or of course if the user's email is verified. So it will return the value of the email verified boolean here. So if the user has verified this email, it will return true here, otherwise it will return false. So let's see the sign-in function in action. So as you can see here, status signed out. So if I press on sign in, it signed in the user. And one thing to mention is that whenever you close the app, this will be saved persistently. So when you reopen the app, the user should still be signed in until he signs out. I hope you liked this tutorial. Please leave a like and subscribe. If you have any questions, leave them down below in the comments, and thank you for watching.